End quote. My husband chose another woman, so I planned a luxury-level comeback that cost him everything. End quote. Part 1, The Silent War of Clara Vance. The sound was not a slap. It was an execution. A public killing of whatever remained of Clara Vance in the eyes of the 12 people watching. Her husband, Julian, stood over her, his knuckles white, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and absolute power. The imprint of his signet ring was already rising in a cruel, geometric welt on her cheekbone. "You will not correct me," he said, his voice a calibrated whisper that carried over the clink of crystal. "Not in my home. Not in front of my guests." Around the 20-foot marble table, his family and associates watched. Some looked away, feigning discomfort. Most did not. His mother, Marguerite, offered a faint, approving smile. His brother, Alistair, gave a slow, deliberate clap, 3 times. This was the final lesson. The one meant to break her completely. Clara did not touch her face. She did not cry. She lowered the hand that had instinctively risen and let it hang, empty, at her side. She looked past Julian, to the grand archway leading to the hall. There, half in shadow, stood her 14-year-old daughter, Eleonora. Not hiding. Recording. The faint red light of her smartwatch glowed like a single, unwavering eye. Julian followed her gaze. His supreme confidence faltered for a microsecond, a crack in the godhead. "Eleonora. To your room. Now." His command, usually law, seemed to dissolve in the air between them. Eleonora stepped forward, into the light. The chandelier caught the frost in her eyes that were her mother's but aged by a century of silent observation. "I am not finished with my homework, Father." Her voice was clear, devoid of fear, stripped of emotion. It was the voice of a librarian stating a fact. Chapter 11. The laws pertaining to fiduciary responsibility and the legal dissolution of assets obtained through coercion. The room, already cold, dropped another 10 degrees. Julian's business partner, Charles, choked on his brandy. "What did you say?" Julian asked, the words crawling out of him. "I said," Eleonora repeated, tapping her watch, which projected a small holographic screen into the air between them, "I am studying. And I am streaming. This live feed has a current audience of 47. Mostly from the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the editorial board of the Financial Chronicle, and the domestic violence crisis network you so generously pretend to fund." The silence was atomic. Marguerite's smile vanished. Alistair's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. "You vicious little," Julian started toward her, but Clara moved. For the first time in a decade, she moved toward him, not away. She placed herself between her husband and her daughter. "Touch her," Clara said, and her voice, unused to command, was rough but absolute. "And every encrypted file she has been compiling for the last 18 months uploads to every news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. Not just the videos of you hitting me, Julian. The emails. The offshore account numbers. The forged signatures on my inheritance documents. The medical records you bribed doctors to alter. The blueprints for the coastal development that violates federal environmental law. The names of the inspectors you paid off." Julian stopped. He looked from his wife's battered face to his daughter's expressionless one. He saw not 2 victims, but 2 archivists. 2 witnesses who had ceased to be human and had become something far more dangerous, a system. "You are bluffing," he hissed, but the terror in his eyes was a new, exquisite color. Clara allowed herself a smile. It felt strange on her lips. "No, Julian. We are simply presenting our findings. The board of your company is seeing them right now, alongside a motion for emergency leadership review filed by my attorney, whom you fired last week. He works for me now." The dining room doors opened. Not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet authority of the law. 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a severe gray suit stood there. "Julian Thorne Vance?" the woman said, holding up a badge. I am Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have warrants for your arrest on charges of domestic terrorism, racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of assault. You have the right to remain silent. As the agents moved in, Julian turned to his family, his empire crumbling in real time. Mother. Alistair. Do something. Marguerite Vance stood, drawing her fur stole around her like a shroud. I do not know this man, she said, her voice brittle. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking a funeral march on the marble. Alistair was already on his phone, his voice a frantic whisper. Sell everything. Now. Julian was handcuffed in the same room where, an hour before, he had toasted his own invincibility. As they led him past Clara, he spat, You are dead. You hear me? You are both dead. Clara leaned close, so only he could hear. We have been dead for years, Julian. Today, we are just the ghosts who came back to collect. The door closed behind him. The remaining guests scattered like cockroaches in sudden light. Clara turned to Eleonora. The girl's composure finally fractured, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. Clara pulled her into an embrace, feeling the fierce, bird-like trembling of her daughter's body. It is done, Clara whispered. The first phase. Eleonora pulled back, wiping the tear away with a sharp, angry gesture. No, Mother. It has just begun. Part 2, The Gilded Cage, a dissection of disappearance. 10 years earlier, Clara Sterling existed. She was not a flash of light or a burst of color, but a solid, substantial presence. An heiress not just to money, but to a legacy. The Sterling fortune was built on Atlantic trade routes and a stubborn, almost antiquated code. A handshake was a contract, a worker was family, and profit never trumped principle. Clara was its unlikely culmination. She possessed her father's steel trap mind for systems, but channeled it into architectural engineering, dreaming in blueprints of carbon-neutral cities and vertical forests. Her portfolio was not merely impressive, it was visionary, a quiet rebellion against the gilded excess she was born into. Her intelligence wasn't loud or performative. It was a deep, still lake, formidable, reflective, and easily underestimated. Julian Vance was a seismic event in her quiet landscape. A venture capitalist, he was the embodiment of the new world, all edges, velocity, and predatory grace. Where Sterling's built, Julian acquired. Where they nurtured, he leveraged. He didn't see Clara, her mind, her dreams, her quiet depth. He saw a distressed asset. The Sterling legacy was undervalued, bogged down by sentimentality. Clara herself was an overlooked subsidiary, ripe for a hostile takeover. Her fortune was the obvious prize, but her mind, he suspected, was the hidden leverage, an untapped resource to be controlled and eventually redirected to serve his own empire. His courtship was a masterclass in psychological restructuring, a hostile takeover in slow, exquisite motion. It began with isolation, framed as exclusive devotion. Your friends are so dramatic, so draining, darling. They don't understand our world. One by one, they fell away, their calls unanswered, their concerns dismissed as jealousy. Her ideas, once praised by professors, became naiveties. Sustainable cities? Admirable, my love, but hopelessly utopian. The world runs on realism, not idealism. Let me handle the complexities. He framed his encroaching control not as domination, but as protection. The world was too harsh, too chaotic for someone of her delicate sensibility. He was her shield. Her father, Arthur Sterling, now frail and mistrustful of a changing business landscape he no longer understood, saw in Julian's ruthlessness a necessary vigor. Charmed by the younger man's certainty, he signed over the management of the complex family trusts, believing he was securing his daughter's future. The final signature was the first brick in the wall. The day after the wedding, a spectacle of white orchids and hollow vows, the first lock clicked shut. Not with a bang, but with the soft sigh of a biometric scanner recognizing only Julian's fingerprint. The cage was not some dark dungeon. It was a triplex penthouse suspended in the clouds, a monument of Carrara marble, Burmese teak, and floor-to-ceiling glass offering a breathtaking, ownership view of the city. It was a prison of impeccable taste. The staff, a chef, a house manager, a maid, were polite, efficient, and their eyes slid over Clara as if she were another piece of furniture. Their paychecks, their loyalty, terminated with Julian. Her access to the accounts bearing her name was theoretical. In practice, every PIN, every password, every security question led back to him. Her schedule, from yoga classes to charity luncheons, was dictated by his assistant, a seamless integration into the narrative of Mrs. Julian Vance. Her old self was systematically archived. The physical portfolio of her city designs vanished from her studio, misplaced during the move. Digital files corrupted. Her seat on the Sterling Foundation board, a token of her lineage, was quietly vacated, to allow her to focus on her new duties as a wife. She was being erased, not with violence, but with administrative efficiency. The physical violence didn't start with a slap. It began with the grammar of possession. A grip on her wrist during an argument, not to hurt, but to punctuate, leaving faint, bracelet-like bruises he'd kiss later, calling them proof of his passion. A playful shove into a doorframe that left her breathless, dismissed as an accident in the dark. The first true slap came the night she tentatively mentioned a continuing education course in urban design. The sound was less shocking than the cold, clean fury in his eyes. You think you need more? What I provide isn't enough? You are an embarrassment. The sting on her cheek was secondary to the tectonic shift inside her, the realization that her mind was now a threat to him. The humiliation was his weapon of choice. He would have her dressed by a stylist, her face painted into placid perfection, and escort her to galas. Arm in arm, the picture of power couple bliss, he'd smile for cameras while his lips, close to her ear, whispered a running commentary of threats. See Senator Clark? He owes me. One word from me and your father's charity audit expands. Smile, Clara. Wider. You look like you're at a funeral. She learned to freeze her face into a serene mask while her soul screamed inside a soundproof box. Eleonora's birth was the tectonic shift he exploited. In her vulnerability, her all-consuming love for the tiny, perfect being, Julian saw not a mother, but a fault line. He declared her emotionally fragile, prone to nervous exhaustion, unfit for the stresses of sole motherhood. A nanny was installed, a woman with the demeanor of a prison warden, who reported directly to Julian on Clara's every interaction with her child. The threat was no longer vague. It was surgical. If you upset the household equilibrium, if you defy me, I will have the evidence to show you are an unstable influence. You will see her on weekends, in a supervised facility. Her love for Eleonora was no longer a source of strength, it was the chain that kept her kneeling, the hook in her heart he could yank at will. The Vance family served as his chorus of justification. Marguerite, the matriarch, was a woman carved from ice and old money. She viewed Clara's education, her quiet thoughtfulness, as flaws. Too intellectual. It makes men insecure. And so soft. The world eats soft things for breakfast. Alistair, Julian's brother, was blunter, seeing her only as a drain on resources. Can't she even produce a son? What exactly is she for? Their monthly dinners were rituals of exquisite torture. They would dissect the wine she chose, too bold, the way she cut her meat, too precise, trying too hard, her parenting, too permissive, or too detached. Julian would sit, sometimes silent, letting their words do his work, sometimes adding a cutting footnote of his own. She's trying, mother. We must be patient with her. And so, Clara shrank. Her world contracted to the minute calculus of Julian's moods, the tilt of his head when he read the paper, the specific sigh he emitted before a critique, the dangerous calm that preceded a storm. Her energy was spent on preemptive soothing, ordering his favorite scotch before he asked, canceling plans at the slightest hint of his displeasure, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Her body became a site of secret cartography, mapped with bruises concealed by high-necked blouses from designers he approved of, masked by strategic layers of foundation he purchased. She spoke less, moved more quietly, made herself smaller in every conceivable way. The woman with blueprints for cities had vanished, replaced by a ghost who drifted through the halls of her own life, a whisper forever drowned out by the booming, all-consuming shout of Julian Vance's world. She was not living. She was maintaining a holding pattern in a gilded cage, the key to which had been melted down and recast as the bars themselves. Part 3: The Turning Point, the Blueprint. The change did not arrive on a beam of heavenly light or in a thunderclap of dramatic revelation. It crept in on silent, digital feet, materializing not in a tearful confession or a slammed door, but on the cool, blue-lit screen of a 12-year-old's laptop. The catalyst was not passion, but data. For Eleonora, solitude had not bred fear, it had forged a formidable intellect. While Clara learned the silent language of Julian's rage, Eleonora immersed herself in the immutable logic of code, the clean architecture of systems. She found solace in binary certainty, a stark refuge from her father's chaotic, emotional cruelty. She was his perfect antithesis. Where he was all volatile impulse, she was crystalline logic. Where he sought to dominate through fear, she sought to understand through pattern. One night, the air in the penthouse still vibrated with the aftershock of a storm. Julian's fury had been triggered by a trivial sin. Clara had ordered a 2015 Bordeaux when his current affection, performatively declared to a dinner guest the week before, was for a 2012. The backhand had been swift, a punctuation mark of disgust. Now, Julian was gone, off to a late-night club where his anger could be diluted into power. Clara moved through the rooms like a wounded animal, her ribs a cage of fire with every breath. She went to check on Eleonora, expecting to find her daughter hidden under blankets, stifling sobs into a pillow, a mirror of her own internal shattering. Instead, she found a war room. The door was ajar, casting a wedge of white light into the dim hall. Eleonora sat cross-legged on her bed, the fairy tale canopy a bizarre contrast to the serious glow of the laptop on her knees. Lines of code, green, white, and amber, scrolled in the reflection on her glasses, painting her focused face in an otherworldly light. Her small fingers were a blur on the keyboard, a staccato rhythm of decisive taps. Clara leaned against the doorframe, the pain momentarily forgotten, replaced by a deeper, more confounding ache. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" Her voice was a rasp, shredded by suppressed screams. Eleonora did not startle. She did not look up. Mapping the attack vectors. The reply was flat, technical, devoid of a child's inflection. A cold trickle, unrelated to the throbbing in her side, traced Clara's spine. She slowly knelt beside the bed, the plush carpet doing little to cushion the protest in her joints. "What does that mean?" "It means," Eleonora said, her eyes still locked on the screen, "he is a system. A complex, corrupt, but ultimately logical system. All systems have vulnerabilities. Backdoors. Failure points. Redundant protocols that can be overloaded. I am cataloging his." Her finger pointed to the center of the network diagram now dominating the screen. Clara's breath hitched. It was a map, but not of any geography she knew. At its nexus was a single, pulsing node labeled JV_primary. Radiating out from it was a spiderweb of connections, a terrifying ecosystem of power. Lines snaked to entities like Vance_Holdings_Cayman, Project_Aegis_LLC, Senator_Black_File. There were clusters for his known allies, with tags noting financial dependency or mutual blackmail. There were links to shell corporations in Delaware and Cyprus, lines dashed to offshore account numbers, and even a branch leading to the name of the family judge who played golf with Julian every Sunday. It was a topographic map of his empire, and her daughter was not just reading it, she was highlighting its fault lines in glaring red. A vertigo worse than any blow washed over Clara. How do you know all this?" Eleonora finally paused, turning her head. The glasses magnified eyes that were ancient, calculating, and utterly dry. He talks on the phone in his study. The microphone on my old baby monitor has a 500-meter range and excellent frequency response. I repurposed it. The audio files are cleaned and processed through a voice-to-text algorithm I modified for better financial lexicon recognition. The financial data is from spear phishing campaigns I ran against his accountant and CFO. The emails appeared to be critical security patches from their software vendors. Asterisk, she stated it as matter-of-factly as another child might describe building a Lego castle. Clara's world tilted on its axis. Her baby. Her pink-room-dwelling, book-devouring baby had been conducting a silent, sophisticated cyber-ops campaign from within the enemy's walls. The fear was immediate and visceral, a primal ice flooding her veins. "You cannot do this," she whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. "If he finds out, what he would do. He will not find out." Eleonora's voice was a steel needle, popping the bubble of Clara's panic. "Because he does not see me. He sees a girl. A silly, quiet accessory. He looks right through me. His greatest vulnerability is not in his firewalls or his lawyers. It is his contempt." She closed the laptop with a soft click, the room plunging into relative darkness save for the nightlight. In the gloom, her silhouette was small but unervingly solid. She reached out and took Clara's hand. Her grip was not the soft, trusting clutch of a child, but the firm, assured grasp of a colleague. "We are going to take it all away from him, Mother. Not by hitting back. He would win that game. He's stronger, and he loves the chaos. We are going to erase him. Digitally, financially, legally, socially. We will dismantle the system, node by node. We are going to make him a non-person in the world he built." That night, as Clara lay in her own cold bed, the despair did not magically lift. It did not dissolve into hope. Hope was too fragile, too ephemeral. Instead, it underwent a profound alchemical transformation. The leaden weight of years of submission, the liquid fear that had flowed through her veins, the gaseous despair that had filled her lungs, all of it compressed under the immense pressure of her daughter's revelation. It hardened. It crystallized. It became something new, a diamond-tipped resolve, cold, clear, and capable of cutting through anything. Her daughter, the quiet prodigy, had not offered a plea for rescue. She had presented a blueprint. A flawless, detailed, actionable blueprint for annihilation. Clara stared at the ceiling, no longer seeing the expensive plasterwork, but visualizing schematics of her own. Eleonora was the strategist, the intelligence operative. Clara realized with sudden, chilling clarity what her role must be. She had spent a decade learning the intimate architecture of Julian's ego, the pressure points of his pride, the theater of his social world. She was the inside asset. The blueprint was in her hands. It was no longer her job to simply survive the architect of her prison. It was her duty to become the architect of his ruin. Part 4: The Secret Plan, Phoenix Protocol. They named their war room in whispers, a title breathed in the dark between mother and daughter, the Phoenix Protocol. It was not a cry for help or a dream of escape. It was a multi-phase, years-long operational blueprint for systematic cremation. Their objective was not to damage Julian's life, but to incinerate it, every pillar, every trophy, every lie, and from the sterile ashes, permit only two entities to rise, Clara and Eleonora Vance, reborn. Clara was the field agent, embedded deep behind enemy lines. Eleonora was the mastermind, the omnipresent eye in the sky, orchestrating everything from her innocuous-looking command center. Phase 1, Intelligence Gathering, the Panopticon. This was Eleonora's sovereign domain. She didn't just build a surveillance system, she engineered a bespoke panopticon tailored to Julian's arrogance. Keyloggers were planted not just on his primary laptop, but on his gym tablet, his car's onboard computer, and the digital notepad in his study. She built a mesh network of microcameras and ambient audio pickups, each component a masterpiece of concealment, a lens peering from behind a smoke detector's grill, a microphone embedded within a high-end power adapter's transformer hum. She created a ghost in his machine, a shadow user in his cloud storage that mirrored his activity in real time. His encrypted messaging apps were breached not through brute force, but by socially engineering his way past customer service to clone his device IDs. The resulting dossier was not merely evidence, it was a digital biography of corruption. File directories bloomed like toxic flowers /video /physical_assault/ contain time-stamped clips, each tagged with the trigger, e.g., incident_047, spilled_wine. /audio /threats_extortion /held cleaned recordings of calls with politicians and regulators. /finance was a labyrinth of shell company maps, wire transfer trails to numbered accounts, and forged signatures on sterling trust documents. Every piece of data was cross-referenced, creating a web where a single screenshot of a bruise could be linked to the medical report he bribed a doctor to alter, and further to the bank transfer that constituted the bribe. This living archive was stored not in one place, but in fragments across multiple encrypted, geographically dispersed servers, with dead man switches set to trigger a cascade of releases should either of them fail to input a bi-weekly code. Phase 2, Asset Reclamation, the Performance. Clara's role demanded the performance of her life. She shed the skin of the cowed wife and meticulously constructed the persona of the repentant simpleton. She leaned into Julian's narrative of her intellectual poverty with devastating sincerity. "Julian, I was thinking about what you said, about leverage," she'd murmur over breakfast, eyes wide with feigned, struggling comprehension. "So if the company borrows money against itself, that's like using a mirror to buy the thing it's reflecting?" He would sneer, puff up with condescension, and in explaining the very basics, would often let slip a crucial detail, a bank name, a partner's weak point, a regulatory loophole. She became a sacred vault, memorizing alphanumeric strings and legal jargon. Through encrypted channels Eleonora established using anonymizing relays and burner phones purchased with cash in distant suburbs, Clara reconnected with Arthur Finch. Her father's lawyer, a man of old parchment and older principles, had watched Julian's takeover with mounting disgust. Their communications were clinical, devoid of emotional plea. Clara presented not as a victim, but as a client providing overwhelming evidence of fiduciary malfeasance. Using Eleonora's data, Finch began filing a series of quiet, precisely targeted motions in Chancery Court, not a noisy, frontal assault, but a surgical severing of tendons. Each motion was a small, legalistic tremor designed to destabilize Julian's control over her assets, laying the groundwork for the eventual, total collapse. Phase 3, Psychological Warfare, The Haunting. This was their joint art project, a dark ballet of destabilization. Eleonora, as the house's unseen spirit, would orchestrate inexplicable phenomena. Julian's beloved, voice-controlled smart home system would develop a will of its own. Lights in his study would dim as he read, only to blaze at full brightness moments later. The climate control would swing from Arctic to tropical, resisting all manual overrides. From hidden speakers, the faint, ghostly strain of a lullaby Eleonora hadn't heard since infancy would play in an empty guest room. Clara's role was more intimate, more insidious. She would weaponize his own secrets. Passing him a document, she might sigh, "It must be so exhausting, keeping all those plates spinning, especially the delicate one in Zurich." He'd freeze, his Swiss account a secret he'd never shared. At a dinner party, she'd innocently ask his business partner, "How is your daughter enjoying her sudden acceptance to Stanford?" A reference to a bribe Julian had arranged, mentioned only in a private email. She never accused, only alluded. The goal was to erode his sense of omnipotence, to plant a virus of paranoia in the operating system of his ego. They needed him emotionally volatile, prone to public unraveling, to furnish the final, indisputable proof of the monster they had documented. Phase 4, The Network, the Mycelium. While Julian built towers, Clara cultivated mycelium, a vast, hidden, interconnected network beneath the surface. She carefully reactivated long-dormant social contacts, not as a bruised wife, but as Clara Sterling, a woman with renewed interest in her family's philanthropic legacy and impact investing. She joined closed, high-security forums for survivors of financial and psychological abuse, but her role was that of a strategist and connector, sharing anonymized case studies of legal tactics and forensic accounting. She and Eleonora identified the key nodes in Julian's network, his sycophantic brother, his corrupt partner, the compliant judge, and began applying silent pressure. An anonymous, data-rich packet would arrive at the IRS, detailing his brother's creative bookkeeping. A rival firm would receive a cryptic tip about a pending deal, sourced from what appeared to be a disgruntled junior analyst within Julian's own ranks. They were not just cutting Julian down, they were salting the earth around him, ensuring nothing loyal to him could grow back. The months bled into years. The Phoenix Protocol became their liturgy, their secret tongue, the rhythm of their hearts. In their war room, they were not victim and child, but co-commanders. Julian, intoxicated by his own perceived invincibility and utterly blinded by his foundational contempt, observed nothing. He mistook Clara's serene efficiency for defeated submission. He interpreted Eleonora's silent absorption in her screens as a welcome, antisocial retreat. Their perfect, chilling obedience was no longer a sign of his control. It was the final, flawless weapon they had forged in the furnace of his tyranny, and they were now masters of its deployment. The cage remained, but its occupants had quietly, methodically, become the architects of its imminent demolition. Part 5: The Final Banquet, Detonation. Thanksgiving was not chosen at random. It was selected with the cold precision of a strategist plotting a coup. It was Julian's secular high holy day, his annual theatrical production titled Dominion. The guest list was his curated congregation, his most vital business allies, whose loyalty was purchased with profit shares and blackmail material, the Vance family, his fan club and enablers, and a sprinkling of carefully vetted social luminaries who served as living props to attest to his cultural refinement. It was the perfect arena, a captive audience of everyone whose opinion he valued, gathered to witness his supremacy. He would never suspect that the stage was, in fact, a gallows they had spent years constructing. Clara and Eleonora dressed for battle not as soldiers, but as high priestesses of a coming reckoning. Clara's dress was a deep, defiant emerald green, a color Julian had once derided as garish and unharmonious with the palette of the home. It was her first public refusal. Sewn into the intricate beading of the bodice was a fiber-optic camera no larger than a ladybug, its feed streaming to multiple secure servers. Eleonora wore her uniform, a smartwatch that was a mobile command center, and a simple silver pendant that was, in fact, a terabyte of encrypted storage containing the Phoenix Protocol's master keys. They shared a look in the hallway mirror, a silent communion. No words were needed. The protocol was live. The dinner unfolded as a masterpiece of slow-burn agony. The air was thick with the smell of roast turkey and arrogance. Julian held court, his voice a sonorous instrument of condescension. He pontificated on the sentimental weakness of environmental regulations, the naive drag of corporate ethics, and the quiet burden of carrying a family that, in his words, contributed ambience, but little appreciable equity. His allies chuckled. His mother, Marguerite, nodded along as if listening to scripture. Clara played her part to perfection, the serene sponge, absorbing every poisonous word, her smile a placid mask. She was waiting for the precise catalytic insult. It came from Charles, Julian's right-hand man, his cheeks flushed with wine and a sense of shared superiority. "Julian," Charles chuckled, waving a hand toward the locked glass doors of the library, "you really ought to put that collection of yours to use. All those first editions Clara brought to the marriage, just gathering dust. A terrible waste." Julian leaned back, a king amused by a jester's observation. "My wife doesn't read anymore, Charles. She finds the pictures confusing." The table rippled with sycophantic laughter. It was a small cruelty, one of thousands, but it was the one they had anticipated. It was the perfect segue. That was when Clara set down her wineglass. The delicate clink was a punctuation mark. All eyes drifted to her. She did not raise her voice. She simply began to speak, and her words, cool and precise, cut through the jovial chatter like a scalpel through fat. "The first edition of Darwin's On the Origin of Species in that library," she said, her gaze fixed on Julian, "is not confusing. Its current appraisal value is $4.2 million. The quarterly dividends from the Sterling Trust, which you have been illegally funneling through Vance Holdings under the code name, Project Chimera, are also not confusing. They amount to $17 million, diverted and unreported. And the deliberate structural flaws in the coastal development blueprints you approved to save $3.1 million in materials?" She paused, letting the absolute silence swell. "Those are criminally negligent. The pilings are underspecified by 20%. They will fail in a Category 3 storm surge. I have the engineering reports you buried. The tableau froze. The smile died on Charles's face. Marguerite's fork hovered midair. Julian's expression performed a grotesque journey, first, baffled incomprehension, as if a lamp had begun speaking, then, dawning, icy disbelief, finally, a rage so pure it drained the color from his face, leaving 2 burning spots of fury high on his cheeks. Have you lost your mind? He hissed, the words slithering across the table. Clara rose to her feet, a slow, deliberate uncoiling. The emerald silk whispered. No, Julian, she said, her voice ringing clear in the cavernous room. I have found my accounting software. And my spine. He moved with the feral speed of cornered prey. The slap was not a mere hit, it was an attempted erasure, a brutal punctuation meant to be the final period on her existence. The crack echoed off the marble floors. Clara's head snapped to the side, the handprint blooming instantly on her cheek like a fatal flower. But she did not stumble. She did not cry out. She slowly, deliberately, turned her head back to face him, a trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. In her eyes was not pain, but triumph. He had just, on camera and before 24 witnesses, provided the final exhibit. It was the starter's pistol. From her place at the table, Eleonora tapped her watch. A low chime sounded, and the massive smart screen dominating the far wall, usually reserved for idyllic landscapes, flickered to life. It split into a quad-screen display. One quadrant showed the live feed from Clara's bodice, frozen on the image of Julian's contorted face mid-swing. Another played a rapid-fire montage of his greatest hits, shoves, grabs, hissed threats. A third scrolled through damning financial documents. The fourth was a live news feed, where a ticker at the bottom already read, "Breaking, Vance Holdings subpoenaed in major fraud probe." The live stream, Eleonora announced, her child's voice eerily calm in the chaos, has an active viewership of 437. Key viewers include the SEC Enforcement Division, the editor-in-chief of the Financial Chronicle, the head of the Coastal Safety Authority, and Grandpa Arthur's legal team. The FBI's cyber unit is also monitoring. They've been tracking the data packets for 18 months. Julian stood, a statue of crumbling empire, looking from the screen to his daughter to his wife. The front door burst open not with a kick, but with the authoritative, practiced swing of federal agents. Arthur Finch stood behind them, a look of grim vindication on his face, holding a tablet that mirrored the evidence on the wall. What followed was not a struggle, but a dissection. As agents recited his rights, Julian's world imploded in real time. Charles, the partner, was already on his phone, barking, "Liquidate everything now," before fleeing out the terrace doors. Marguerite Vance let out a thin wail, not for her son, but for the social death knell the scandal represented. Alistair, Julian's brother, pointed a trembling finger. He acted alone. We knew nothing. The carefully vetted socialites recoiled as if he were contagious, their whispers already weaving the narrative of his fall. Clara watched, the taste of blood and victory metallic on her tongue. The Phoenix Protocol's final sequence was executing flawlessly. The intelligence had been gathered, the assets were being reclaimed by the authorities on her behalf, the psychological warfare had culminated in his very public, documented implosion, and his network was now a contagion zone, everyone fleeing the source. The detonation was complete. All that remained was to rise from the radioactive ashes. Part 6 Aftermath, The New Kingdom. The fallout was not merely swift, it was systemic, a controlled demolition of a corrupt empire. Julian Vance's sentencing to 42 years in federal prison was not the climax, but a bureaucratic formality. The true unraveling occurred in wood-paneled courtrooms and sterile government offices. His wealth was not just stripped, it was forensically disassembled. Assets were traced, seized, and repatriated. The Vance Holdings logo was removed from buildings, its stock ticker rendered a ghost in the market data feed. What wasn't forfeited to the government as penalty reverted in a great, legal tide to its rightful owner, the Sterling Trust, now under the sole control of Clara Sterling Vance, soon to be, by deliberate choice, simply Clara Sterling once more. The restitution came with punitive damages, a cold, numerical apology from the state for its previous blindness. Clara did not retreat into the quiet luxury of a passive heiress. Her engineering mind, once forced into dormancy, now had a terrifying new focus: structural failure. Not in buildings, but in lives. She founded Vulcan Solutions, named for the Roman god of fire and forge. Its mission was forensic architecture and digital financial security for survivors of coercive control. She designed safe houses that were masterpieces of passive defense, panic rooms disguised as walk-in closets with independent oxygen supplies, window glass that frosted opaque at a voice command, network infrastructure completely isolated from the public grid. She developed software suites with user-friendly interfaces for documenting abuse, apps that timestamped, encrypted, and geotagged every entry, automatically creating court-ready evidentiary chains. She became a consultant to district attorneys, teaching them to read the blueprints of psychological captivity as clearly as she once read schematics for skyscrapers. Eleonora, at 16, bypassed university to become the world's youngest certified ethical hacker. Her certification examiners were reportedly both dazzled and unnerved. She was retained as a consultant by Interpol's Financial Crime Unit, her insights into the intersection of domestic terror and cyber-enabled fraud proving invaluable. Her TED Talk, The Logic of Survival, How I Algorithmized My Father's Downfall, was not an emotional testimony but a chillingly brilliant lecture on threat modeling, attack surface reduction, and turning an oppressor's data trails into their own noose. She spoke of love not as a feeling, but as the most secure encryption protocol, a shared, private key between two allies under siege. They lived in a home Clara designed from the ground up on a secured parcel of land. It was a study in light, transparency, and absolute control. Walls of bullet-resistant glass looked out onto a private forest. The silence within was profound, a clean, empty vessel they could fill with music or conversation, not a tense void awaiting an explosion. They did not mark the anniversary of Julian's arrest. That was a day of violence. They celebrated Emancipation Day, the date the final legal instrument was filed, severing the last financial, nominal, and custodial tie. That was the day of creation. 3 years to the day after the Thanksgiving detonation, Clara was in her study, reviewing structural analyses for a new shelter network. A discreet news alert ticked across her secondary monitor: former finance magnate Julian Vance, 49, found deceased in his cell at USP Florence. Apparent cause: cardiac arrest. No foul play suspected. She read it once. Then again. She felt no surge of anything. Not relief, not sorrow, not the faint, bitter taste of victory. It was as if she had been holding a tense, awkward posture for a decade, and someone had finally mentioned the strain. She could stop. The space he occupied in her psyche, once a looming, dark specter, was simply empty. A cleared plot. It felt neither good nor bad. It felt neutral. It felt like space. Eleonora entered, her tablet glowing. She didn't mention the news. She stated facts. The last appellate court denied his mother's final motion. The civil suits from the coastal development plaintiffs are settled. The probate court has closed the file on the estate reclamation. His net worth, as of this morning's final audit, is 0. He is officially a non-entity. She delivered the data as a systems report. Clara looked at her daughter, this fierce, self-assembled creature they had built not in spite of the darkness, but within it, using its materials. "Are you all right?" she asked, the question encompassing everything. Eleonora considered it, her head tilting in a gesture that was purely her own. "I am not happy he is dead. Happiness is an irrelevant metric. I am satisfied that the system worked. The system we designed. Input, evidence of corruption and violence. Process, legal and digital protocols. Output, justice and nullification." She paused. The logic was sound. Clara nodded, a deep, acknowledging motion. That was the true victory, the only one that mattered. It wasn't about his destruction. It was about their creation. They had not merely escaped a burning house. They had studied the fire, reverse-engineered the combustion, and then built a new, fireproof city with its own laws of physics, its own scales of justice, and its own formidable, unsentimental love, a love that was less an emotion than a mutual, unbreakable pact of absolute protection. A soft ping echoed in the quiet room. A notification from Clara's most secure terminal. It was an encrypted message, routed through 7 layers of anonymizing servers. It was from a woman in a country halfway across the globe, the beneficiary of one of Vulcan Solutions' first pro bono interventions. The message was simple, a digital whisper from the shadows: the blueprint worked. He is gone. We are free. How do we begin? Clara's fingers moved to the keyboard. She looked out at the tranquil forest, then at Eleonora, who gave a slight, knowing nod. A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips, not one of mercy, nor of gloating, but of pure, undiluted purpose. She typed the reply, the foundational tenet of their new world, the only answer that was ever true. You already have. This was not a story of revenge. This was a manual for reclamation. Share this with every woman who has been told she is too quiet, too soft, too much, or not enough. Share this with every person who feels the walls of a gilded cage closing in. Your silence is not weakness. It is data gathering. Your obedience is not surrender. It is tactical positioning. Your fear is not a chain. It is a fuel. The most powerful weapon a target has is the predator's belief that she is prey. Turn their contempt into your camouflage. Turn their violence into your evidence. Turn their empire into your crime scene. And then, rebuild. Stronger. Smarter. Unforgiving. Comment Phoenix if you believe in building from the ashes. Share if you know someone who needs this blueprint. Subscribe. The war is not over. We are just changing the battlefield.